Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Lounging with Lisa, the video series that has me lounging while coming at you with thoughts of the day. I'm here at the Coney Lake Historical Society meeting. Coney Lake Historical meeting. I'm going to zoom around here and just show you. They're going to do a thing about orphan trains. I thought it was interesting, so that's why I'm here. I'll try to get Roseanne in on the action. Hold on. She's approaching, ladies and gentlemen. There she is carrying all of her things. And here she comes. I'm going to pause. This might be crooked. Hang on. Just a minute. I'm resuming just for the heck of it, even though nothing's really going on. Okay. I'm here with Julia Carlano.
Hello.
And she used to be the president of this fine establishment. Just tell us what's new at the Historical Society.
Well, we're sort of gearing down our year because we're kind of at the end of our year here. It's November. We're going to have a Christmas party in December, and we're going to have no meetings January, February because it's always cold.
It's harder for some of the people to get out.
But we're working on lots of things for the 2020. I was just talking with the program chair, Diane Dominic. We're working on some programs for next year, so stay tuned for that.
I will absolutely do that.
And we should have a lot of those by very early spring. We'll have those announced. We have a lot of events coming up next year. We're going to have our paddle fest again, etc.
Oh my goodness, we're going to start. Thank you so much, though. Okay.
Before we get started with that, back over here is Jen, who has the memberships. So if you haven't paid your 2020 dues, they're due now. Roseanne is walking around with the 50-50. Where's she at? Over there. For the drawing. If you want to sign up for the Christmas party, you must be a member, and you'll have to see Jean after the program. Or you can see Dale. Wait,
Okay,
Dale, so
I'm gonna
everybody knows
pause.
who you are.
This gal's going to introduce the program here. He's passing the microphone, ladies and gentlemen. Hang on to something. I'm using a tripod.
Hello, can you hear me? I'll try to breathe deeply. Welcome, everybody. It's going to be a really interesting program tonight. This is our last meeting of this year. And Jean Shen, Jean?
Thank you all for coming out. I hope when you go home, you're glad you came. To introduce the program, I want to just say I did not know anything about this topic until I was given something for the archives. It was a little purse which I should have brought with me, but a man brought from New York City on the Orphan Train and kept with him all these years, and his daughter donated to the museum, which sent me on a quest about the Orphan Trains because I'd never heard of them before. And since this is November and Veterans Month, I will say that he was also a veteran. So it does kind of tie into Veterans Month. So with that, having said that, think about the year 1854 or 1856, depending on which one of the articles you read. The country was just 80 years old. It had only been 60 years since Evansburg was established here at home. Now think about that time. There were no immigration laws at the time, and overseas people heard about the wonderful new country and all it had to offer. And so they came to see for themselves. From countries such as Ireland, England, Italy, Poland, Germany, and others. And when they came, they landed in New York City, ready for a new life. Life was not as easy as they had been told it might be, and though apparently it was better than their old countries because they all stayed. Men worked, well, unless they died. Men worked in factories long hours and in very hard conditions that were not always safe, and so many died an early death. Their wives stayed at home and took care of the kids and the homes, also working long hours in unsanitary conditions with very little food. In the long hours, poor health and scarcity of food took their toll, and soon they were thousands of kids homeless and eventually just roaming the streets of New York City to fend for themselves as best they could. Depending on the reports, again, there were several different articles that I read, there were either 10,000 or 30,000. Now that's a big difference, but I don't know which one's right. At any rate, for 75 years between 1854 in 1929, more than 250,000 orphans or deserted children were sent from New York City to other places on what is known as the Orphan Train or else the Mercy Train, depending on who was describing it. The idea of this came from, who thought it'd be better lives for the children, came from a man named Charles Loring Brace, who founded the program. He believed that hard work, education, and firm but compassionate child caring and Midwestern Christian foundation values were the only way to save these children from life of disparity and poverty. All the material that I found on this has been in various books and on the internet. It's nothing that I've made up. At the time, there were no social service agencies taking care of the children, and this was the beginning of what is now the foster care system today. Orphanages were built in New York City, but they could not hold 10,000 or 30,000 children. So, Mr. Brace decided that he would contact various people that he knew around the country, and he's put all these children on trains and told told the people they would be coming and they would be dropped off at different places so to get ready for them. I have sent a couple of the handbills around that were showing what they were. These are some of the pictures of some of the kids on the trains getting ready to get on the trains. You can see they're from all ages, from babies up to about 14 or 15, depending on which train they were going on. And it sounds like they were nice, comfortable trains. In reality, the babies were in the passenger ones. They were put on boards to make it look like a bed. The older children were put in boxcars, just as they took them out of Germany for the Holocaust. Only there they were taking them to kill them. These were in boxcars, sending them for what they hoped would be a better life. Handbills and newspaper advertisements were used to announce the arrival of the children and availability of the children. Some of the towns actually had committees that had formed to kind of scrutinize the families that wanted them. Others didn't. They would take them off. In New York City, the children would be cleaned up, given decent clothes, and put on the trains to travel to unknown places. Reports were that some of the older children were somewhat excited about the new adventures and possibly new lives, while others were afraid of what the future would hold. Now consider yourself a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old whose parents have died and you don't know where you're going. The younger children were said to be just scared of where they were going and that what would happen to them. As I said, the babies were put in the trains. The other children were put in what they also know like cattle. They were described as put in there like cattle. Later, when more funds became available, the children were able to ride in Pullman cars, but that was quite a bit later. Some stories said that the representatives from the Sister of Charity and other agencies would accompany the children on the train. Others said there would be one man or maybe a nurse for all these children that were put on the train at the time. And the train would be bound with as many as they could hold on the train. When they would pull into the depot, they would tell the children not just wait, and they would pull them off, and they would either go into the depot itself, into the depot there, or they would take them to a church or a nearby house, nearby community hall. Put them on a stage-like thing so everybody could see what they look like. And then the prospective people who wanted to, quote, adopt them or use them in foster care, whichever age, when you prefer, would inspect them. They would even check their teeth. They would check and see how strong they were. They would decide whether or not these kids were good enough to go to their homes. Some of them were using them for farm work, so they wanted to be sure that the children were strong enough to do it. Others wanted the younger girls because they could do the housework. The favorite ones were the babies or the teenage boys. The younger girls got the last choice. And when they were all done, everybody had picked somebody that they wanted and they were able to go home. The children that were not chosen were put back on the train and taken to the next place, hopefully to get off at someone the next one. They didn't know when or where they would be placed. Their siblings were not allowed to be placed together, so they would be saying goodbye to their brother or sister, everybody they even knew, as 6 or 7 off of this train going into a new adventure. They were also told that the Children's Aid Society would check on them once a year. And according to some reports, they were good about that, other reports not so good. So again, it depended on who was doing the writing and what they considered checking on them. Whether it was just a a quick call, or whatever, however they were. I remember back in those days, they didn't have computers and Facebook and all that stuff. Many of the children would run away from home, often because they were so scared and they felt they were being beaten or being not taken care of good enough. But the children were taken to new homes, leaving whatever family they could. Those who were no longer claimed would get back on the bus, and for 75 years this program continued. Originally it was thought that Children's Aid Society representatives would visit once a year, but that didn't happen nearly as often as was planned. By 1911, the program had developed enough that private adoptions could be arranged ahead of time for church programs, but the Orphan Train system continued until 1929. At that time, laws and programs to protect children were being established, along with immigration laws, so that people weren't just coming into the country and dying and leaving the kids to fend for themselves. So between the two things, they no longer use the orphan trains to get someplace for the children to live. While some people considered the program very successful, others weren't so sure. Many of the children ran away, some got into legal troubles and had other issues. But just like today, others thrived in their foster home. As you know, if you've ever had foster children, some of them thrive and some of them don't. And I think it just depends on how they're treated and what their personality is like. Now this I found interesting. Statistics show that 80% of the children who rode the orphan train did well in life. 8% returned to New York City, and 5% either died or were arrested. There were no figures to show what happened to the other 7%. Maybe they just couldn't be found. I never figured out, well, that doesn't add up to 100, so I don't know what happened to the other 7%. Originally, the riders of the train were reluctant to talk about their experiences, but as they got older, they did, and some of the descendants learned about the orphan train. A museum was established in Concordia, Kansas, to house some of the memorabilia and records from the orphan trains movement. The impact of the trains were felt everywhere, since the trains went west and south. And I do have a map here that shows all the places that they went, how many were established in each place. It was kind of interesting to see how far they went, and you wondered how long some of these kids wondered if they'd ever get off the train, if they were told when they left, this is where you'll be going or not. There was nothing that said what they were. One of the trains stopped in Meadville in the early 1900s when a young man named Raymond Lewis got off and was put on a stagecoach and taken to Coney Lake, where he was dropped off in front of what was then Corey's grocery store and is now Artist Dress and Beauty Shop. His daughter, Murray Lou Lewis, who now lives in Florida, first told us of a story when she donated some of his things to the Historical Society. And I was kind of surprised because I shouldn't say I'm a historian because I'm not really, but I was surprised how many people had never heard of the orphan trains. And then I found out that a few people did. And Phyllis Amos told me that Glenn Laird, I don't know if any of you know him or not, she said that he also came on the orphan train, but I was never able to contact any of his relatives to find out whether that was true or not. Now, Murray Lou Lewis, his daughter, told me that Raymond Lewis never lived in New York City. So she doesn't know how he got on the orphan train. But he was born near Roadhouse House, New York, near Salamanca in 1898. And she's not sure what year he came off the train, but knew it was an early age. We did find him on the census in Salamanca in 1910, and he was listed, now he would be 12 years old at the time. He was listed as a servant. The only thing he brought with him, as I said, was a small purse. His mother never walked after he was born. Murray didn't know why, but she never walked. She was in a wheelchair, and so he was raised by his grandmother. His father, they were married, but I don't know, nobody ever said what happened to his father. So he went by his father's name, but we don't know what happened to his father. And after his grandmother died, he went put on the orphan train, and that was his first trip to go somewhere. She did not know with whom he first lived in Coney Lake, but I feel arrangements must have been made in advance. This is my own theory. I have no reason to, I just think it. Because I can't imagine why they would take one kid off a train in Meadville and drive him to Coney Lake by stagecoach and dump him off. If somebody wasn't there to greet him, I can't imagine anybody being that hard-hearted. She didn't know whether he came in the winter or the summer. She just said he just remembers coming in a stagecoach, which kind of blows my mind because I can't think of people that were living when I was living, riding in a stagecoach. I'm like, oh my gosh, am I old? At various times, he lived with the Cooley family. Sarah and Evan were school teachers. The Faust family, the Ramseys, and the Izbinsky family. She said life wasn't always easy for her father, and she wasn't sure when some of the incidents occurred, whether they were when he was much younger or whether they were when he was a teenager. But she remembered him saying that the only Christmas gift he ever got was a navel orange in his stocking. She also said that she and her brother always wanted a pony, and he refused to allow them to have a pony, and finally, after many years, he told them why. He said one of his foster families, and I don't know which one, had told him he could have a pony if he worked for it for a year. So he worked for it for a year, and just about the time he was to get it, the pony died, and he was never given a pony. And so he said he would never ever have a pony in the house. And she was just heartbroken at the whole idea of this young kid working for a year for a pony and never getting it. Some reports indicate that the children had no sense of identity. They're like, who am I? Who am I really? And I was surprised when Murdy told me that her father had that same issue. She said he would say, I don't know who I am. And she would reply, you're my daddy, Daddy. But he still wanted to know who he was and why he was there. The Ramsey family was very influential in his life, just as they were in other people's lives in the county. He was working for them at the Ford garage and was sent to Detroit to learn more about automobiles. When he was there, he met a cousin whom he didn't even know. The cousin lived in Blooming Valley and told him that had his father knew about his circumstances, he would have taken young Raymond to live with them. Some of the family, the Kidders, which was his mother's maiden name, since moved to Conneaut Lake. I only tell you that only because some of you may have known them. I didn't know them, but some of you may have. Young Raymond Lewis soon became very successful in the automobile business, and he made an impact in Conneaut Lake. He served on Borough Council for 12 years, some as president, was a member of the Volunteer Fire Department for 12 years, including 7 as chief, was a trustee of the Presbyterian Church, taught first aid, and was a member of the Kiwanis Club, and also employed many people in his business. He did not have a birth certificate until he decided to go in the Army in 1920. And that's when they had to find a birth certificate for him, and all they could find out was that he was born in 1898 in Salamanca, New York. And she said it was quite traumatic for him to realize that he didn't even have a birth certificate, so he really did not know who he was. But he went to the Army, served in the Army, came back out, and settled in Conneaut Lake, where he totally made a difference. It seemed as though some of the people did not approve of the Orphan Train, and I can understand why when you think of them putting kids in what they called cattle cars and sending them across country. But it seemed to have fulfilled its purpose of finding homes with enough food for the children and a place to sleep. Some reports, and I found this interesting because you can't believe everything you read on the internet, which I learned a long time ago, but anyhow, some reports said that a Supreme Court justice was one of the people on the Orphan Train, and then they later said it was Sandra Day O'Connor. So Jane looked it up for me, and it could not have been Sandra Day O'Connor because the Orphan Train stopped in 1929, and she wasn't born until 1930. So that one was not true. It also said that there was 2 governors that rode the train, but it did not mention who they were, but it did say that they both rode the train at the same time. Now there were nothing to back that up. So I really don't know whether that is true or not, but apparently some of the people who rode the train did go on to do things in their life that really did make a difference. The orphan trains were a big part of the movement to keep children in crisis. To help children in crisis, I'm sorry. Some newspapers at the time would list which children were placed with a family in the Midwest particularly, and several of the articles would show this Charles, age 12, blah, 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 went to live with this family, went to live with that family. It was really kind of interesting. They were very detailed about 10 or 12 kids each time that would stay at that particular place. While some of the records were kept, it appears that not all the children were documented, so I'm not quite sure how they know there were 250,000, because of none of the agencies that I checked had any record of either Raymond Kidder or Raymond Lewis. And while he was brought to town, Conneaut Lake, and the town was better for it, we still don't know who brought him to town. At some stage, they started contacting Catholic priests to task them to arrange for families to take children in, We don't know that, I don't think at that time Connie Lake had a Catholic church, but whether they talked to somebody in Neva or what, I don't know. Myrna didn't know. She said that he did not talk about it much until he was much older in life, and he didn't remember all the things, but she did remember how upset he was over not having a birth certificate and not knowing who he was. He was so influential that several of his employees just loved him, and the one man loved him enough to name his child after him because he was so good to the people in town. Myrna said that when her father died, the man came all the way up from Pittsburgh just to tell her that her father was the only one in the bad time when the flu struck, and he said he went around from door to door to see if there was anything he could do to help the people there. And sometimes you wonder, what was he thinking when he went there? He came here as a young child, knew nobody, and how he made out. And I don't know the whole system enough to know why he went from one family to another. But apparently, she said, the only thing he ever said negative about them was that one of them, somebody here or Salamanca, I don't know where, the thing about the pony. The rest of the time, he said they were all very good to him. And he finally decided his identity was really a mixture of all the people that helped him to become the man that he was. And he said if it weren't for all these people, he would not have known who he was, he would not have any identity at all, and he would never have succeeded in life as he did. I was impressed by the story of how something that happened on a nationwide basis could impact our little town. Because you don't think about it, you think of these kids in a cattle car, and you think, oh, they were kids that just nobody wanted or whatever, and then you think about them when they got older and what they did, and 80% of them were successful, either because of the orphan train or despite the orphan train, depending on how you looked at it. Again, some of the people didn't think that they should be put in the cars like cattle cars, but that apparently was the best way to get them here with as many of them as they did. Now, I did pass around some of the flyers for you to look at. Tucker, that's a picture of Raymond Rose. I'm supposed to be telling you what you're seeing, but I guess I figured you're all smart enough to know.
We're not.
Some of the flyers there, they would say, a company of homeless children from the East will arrive at McPherson on September 15th, and they will be at the Opera House. And then it would list the committee members. And others of you saw some of the flyers that I sent around would just say children without homes. A number of children brought from New York are still without homes. Friends from the country, please call and see them. Merchants, farmers, and friends generally are requested to give publicity to the above and much obliged. And that was from the agent, and I'm assuming that was the railroad agent, because that's what it sounded like. But I thought it was very interesting that all these kids were just wandering the streets. And I wonder how many of them died before they even got put on a train, and how many of them wish they had died before they ended up where they were. And so I just thought the whole orphan train movement was so interesting to me, because I never thought of that really affecting Conneaut Lake. I mean, that was in New York City 150 years ago, or 250 years ago. And I just thought it was very interesting, the stuff that she said that her dad told her. And then when I was reading it, it said that many of the kids couldn't figure out who they were. They were like, who am I? I don't have an identity. I don't have a birth certificate. I have nothing except memories of riding in a boxcar somewhere. The babies were treated very well on the train, but the other kids, as you can see, were just lined up, put on the train, and dropped off at the next depot. And that's my story about the orphan train.
This picture, Gene, is from Kansas.
This picture is from Kansas.
This is where the kids were taken off the train in Kansas. This is a picture of when the kids were taken off the train in Kansas and taken to a hall or something to be adopted there. And that's what that particular picture is.
Some of the people considered the children as nothing more than indentured servants. They were sent there to be taken with the idea that they'd be treated like a family member, but some of them just were not. They were treated as hired hands, not as a family member, while others were treated very kindly. It just depended on who took you and what happened after that. And there weren't a lot of stories that told exactly what happened to all of them. There were 4 or 5 of them on the internet that said, this is my story. And most of them were 90 years old when they were telling the story. And there was a little thing saying, you know, these are memories. We can't verify anything that they said because they were just memories. And you know how, you know, you say you walked in the snow up to your waist whenever you went to school. Well, remember how little you were then, so it might have been up to your waist. So how many of the stories are true? I have no idea. But I do know that the Orphan Train definitely made a difference in people's lives, including those in Coney Lake today. People were taught first aid. People were kept safe. People were sold cars that were very good. And he was a good person in the town to know. He served our country. He served us well. And so we just wanted to let people know a little bit about how Raymond Lewis came to meet Coney Lake. And it wasn't in a fancy Ford car. It was on a train full of other kids and then on a stagecoach. Okay, are there any questions which I may not know the answer to? Yes.
Where was this Ford garage? Where would it?
It's in Coney Lake.
Well, I know
It
that,
was-
but
I do know, but I can't remember.
Okay.
It was,
oh, okay,
First
thanks.
National Bank is.
Okay.
Yes.
When did Mr. Lewis pass away?
I knew you were going to ask that.
Okay, if you don't know, that's okay. Did you
I have it on
know?
a piece of paper somewhere, but I can't find it.
Can I call you?
You can call me and I might find the paper, but I can't guarantee
Did
it.
you know him personally?
I did.
You met the man himself?
Mhm.
My
I think, how many
coworker.
of you knew Ray Lewis?
Is
In
he?
here, anybody? What do you remember about him?
I remember after he passed away, Morty was going through some of the memorabilia of his. And I remember he must have been in a play or something because there was a top hat and gloves and things. So he must have been in something that they had in Clannad Lake.
Did anybody else know him personally?
That was Roberta
Anybody want to
Alexander.
say anything?
The Ford garage. The Ford garage before it was where the bank is now, was down where Hundred Oil was for a long time. And Ray worked as a mechanic there. I talked to Ray about that.
Okay.
And he moved a house which was down where the Gulf Station was, up across from the new housing for a big house he moved up there. He never really finished it. He sold it to John Van Honk, and John Van Honk tore it down. And there's another little house, which was part of it. It's gone, and there's like a double wide in there now. He had a son, too. I can't.
Yes, he has a son. He lives in Florida also. It was said that the 250,000 orphans that came on orphan trains now have, first I read 1 million. I thought, that isn't very many, that's only 4 per person. But then I read another thing that said 3 million, which sounded a little more like it because Ray had a son and a daughter, and I don't know how many grandchildren. I know she has 2, I don't know how many he has. But I think 3 million descendants of the people that rode on the orphan trains. So if you think about what the kids did and what their descendants did, and the descendants would not have been born had someone not helped these kids. Even if it was awful to put them on a train, somewhere along the way they got food and were raised so that they could contribute to society. And so I think we really need to think about not just these 250,000 people, but all their descendants. Because as all of you know, we'd like our descendants to do better than we did. Anybody else have any questions? I do remember Dorothy Lewis, Raymond's wife. Raymond was the fire chief, and I was working at the Tribune, and every time they would go out, she would call and say, "This is Mrs. Raymond C. Lewis." She never said Dorothy. "This is Mrs. Raymond C. Lewis. The fire truck just went to wherever." She never failed to call. She always called. And Marty would talk about going down to the garage with her father and learning some language that her mother didn't appreciate. And her father, and she said she couldn't go down there anymore, so her father said, "You have to remember not to say those words in front of Mom." Does anybody else have any questions?
How old was this man when he made his start that he sold him Clay Lake?
Well, she thinks he came, we think he came between 1910 and 1920. Because in 1910, he was in Salamanca, New York. She thinks he came a little bit before then. But if he did, then someone lied on the census, because in 1910, he was on the census there. but I think he came here right after that. So he probably would have been about 12, in my thinking anyhow. She was amazed that he never talked much about it until they talked about the birth certificate, and that's when she learned, you know, it was like, why don't you have a birth certificate? And he was like, I don't know who I am. And so they had to go through quite a deal to get a birth certificate for him to be able to enlist in the Army. And the lady down here has a question.
Jean, did you know any of his background while you knew him?
Did I know his background when I knew him? No.
Yeah.
All I knew was he was Ray Lewis from the Ford Garage and the fire chief.
You didn't know anything?
No. I didn't even know about the orphan trains until Ray Lou brought this little purse in with a handkerchief in it and said he brought it on the orphan train. I'm like, what do you mean the orphan train? I never heard of the orphan train. And like I said, I would like to think I know a little bit about history, but I began to realize I know very little about history. And that's when I first heard about the orphan train. So I asked the true historians, and none of them knew either, except Gail Fales said that she remembers reading a romance novel when it mentioned the orphan train. But then one other person said, oh yes, they knew all about the orphan trains. And then a couple of others said yes. Phyllis Amos told me about Gwen Laird, who also supposedly came. She said that she had often talked to his wife about the orphan train. And I was like, well, why didn't I ever hear about this? And I just didn't. I don't know. I guess I lived in a sheltered life or something. I don't know. Anybody else have any questions, comments? So, yes.
I wonder if the flu that came about in 19...
Area citizens.
Had anything to do with this large number of children.
If the flu had anything to do with it, it could, yeah. They said it was because of all the illnesses and that. They took the lives of the mothers and the grandmothers and all those, yeah.
That happened to my grandmother. She had to give up all her, farm them all out, all her children.
Oh, wow.
To work because her husband died.
Did she know where they all went?
Yes, she did.
Yeah.
One of them went to the family, and my mother and her brother went to in D.C., but they never adopted them.
Yeah. I know that there are some families now that will adopt the other one's kids, but apparently they were not in contact, and so did not get adopted. Yes?
Did the Civil War have anything to do with that? Since it started in 1854 and the Civil War was 1865.
Well, you know, I thought about that and I wondered, but basically the stuff that I read all talked about all the immigrants coming to New York and not having the ones that were able to get jobs worked so hard that they died. But I wondered about that because I thought, wow, this was even before the Civil War. None of the articles that I read mentioned the Civil War. So I really don't know the answer to that.
Because that's what the St. Paul's Home was started, the orphans of the Civil War.
Oh, okay.
St. Paul's Home in
Okay.
Louisville.
Okay. They said there were some orphanages in New York City, but not enough to hold all the kids. And that's why this man thought it would be good to send them west, because in the Midwest especially, because he liked their values. And I had no idea about his background, how he knew, how he got in touch with these people, nothing. I did send a few of the handbills around so you can see what they look like. Some of them were advertised in papers, and others were just posted places, so they could tell, it'd be like, if you want a child, come and get it. It was like, whoa. Anybody else? Yes.
I'm not pausing.
Comment. There is a book called The Orphan Train, and I do believe it was a very, very good book. I think the characters in it are fictional, but it is about the premise and the history of the Orphan Train. It's a very, very good book.
It is a good book. Two people gave me that book when they found out I was interested in that Orphan Train. I was really kind of excited that they would think about it. And so I did read it. It is a very good book. And it does have some of the history of the Orphan Train movement in that book. Yeah, it is a nice book.
Pausing.
But there was never anything in any of the articles that said whether any of the people, now in this fictional book, well, I'm going to blow it if you haven't read the book yet, but one of the girls in the book and one of the guys in the book reunite after many years. There was nothing in any of these articles that ever said that these couples met on the Orphan Train. And when I talked to a lady at the museum in Kansas, she didn't indicate any of that at all. All she knew was what she had on a piece of paper that said, this is where they were placed. And like I said, I talked to several agencies in New York that were supposed to have track of all these kids. They did not have his name. She didn't have his name. So we're not sure who placed him on that train, but somebody did. And he got off in Meadville, ended up in Conneaut Lake.
Well, coming from New York City,
Pausing.
would that train?
We are selling it at the museum,
Sets of
and they will be on
coasters.
sale November 30th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. at the
Wonderful.
museum. So if you want to look at the stuff that we have up here,
Yes, I
that
do.
is new to us, and, you know, they're kind of neat. Does anybody else want a 50-50? Okay, your memberships are back there, and to get tickets for the Christmas party is back here with Dale. What's that? And the sign in. If you haven't signed in with me, you're signing in.
If anybody wants to see any of these
Yeah, I'll pause this.
I don't know if they took out the money and subdivided it.
How much?
I don't know. Ask Dale.
That's
How much
Roseanne.
is in this?
Roseanne's the one that covers all the
Oh,
fun
they did
meetings.
subdivide it.
Where
The number
people
is
argue and stuff.
973
973
699.
699, ladies and gentlemen.
If you believe in past
Back here.
lives, depending on when she was born, and those things were running since 1854.
Come up and see.
It might be why her interest is so intense.
Well, that's true. Mine's intense because I stumbled on it and it goes along with it. I'm going to pause.
Okay, this will be our last meeting.
I'm resuming.
until-
Here's some delightful desserts and things. That looks wonderful. Oh, my goodness.
Enjoy your
I'm going to look
dinner.
at the coasters, ladies and gentlemen. Here's people. People who need people.
Was examples.
I'm going to film.
We've got a set of the hotels, a set of the boats, just different scenes around Conneaut Lake Park.
Okay, great. So these are
$8
just,
a set.
that's okay, a sample or whatever. And then,
The new mug we have, these are $5.
love it. That's great. That's a good price. Okay, good, because I'll be there. Signing off, I think, pausing. I feel kind of silly doing my closing, so it doesn't matter. I'll just talk. That's it. Lounging with Lisa, the video series that has me lounging while coming at you with thoughts of the day. Join me, join others. Drop your political identities. Let's focus on issues. Leave labels at the door. Research before you judge. Remember, war is a racket. Don't take my word for it. Check out General Smedley Butler and what he had to say. Also, I can tell you there's some alternative researchers out there that have concluded or are on the way to concluding about these orphan trains that there was some sort of catastrophic event that led to a lot of deaths and our real history's being hidden from us and all this jazz. It's very deep. It's wild and crazy, but anyhow, just another review of it. That's all. Over and out. Bye.